Hi guys! After the last couple of videos, these two, which you should be able to click in this video, I came to the conclusion that the stock fan on the AMD FX-8350 was stock fan, stock cooler, wasn't adequate. Now, I've been asked by Prepper Mike to explain the thought process of looking for an alternative for that cooling setup and the considerations I go through when looking at technical specifications basically. So let's start out at the beginning, and that is the dimensions of the computer case. I chose an Cooler Master Elite 361 case for its compact size while being able to house a full-sized ATX motherboard. Now here you see it in the desktop setup version, but it is a bimodal computer case, so you can use it as a tower or as a regular desktop. This case, however, has some limitations, and they are mainly because of its size. If you take in the size of the DVD player over here, you will recognize that there's only a limited amount of headroom for a CPU cooler, as well as limited amounts of the size. And let me go like that. Wow, doesn't really want to. Okay, for cooling solutions. Now in this case the power supply is planted over here, so not typically like above the motherboard or down below somewhere. No, it is here, and the motherboard sits in this area. Now these two fans are both, or places for fans are both, for 8 centimeter fans. On the top of the case there is one for a 12 centimeter fan, as well as here. Of course you see multiple mounting holes, so you can use 8, 9.2 I think, and 12 centimeter fans here and here. At the front of the case there's as well a place for an 8 centimeter fan that blows in air. That's the basic premise. Now, two considerations. First of all, what type of cooling setup is required with the motherboard and CPU you're intending to put in such a case? And I chose the AsRock 990 FX Extreme 9 motherboard. Looked at the Extreme 3 version first, but AsRock downgraded it for my preferred CPU, which is of course the AMD FX-8350. So, now when I spoke to a technical guy at AsRock, he recommended for basically that CPU to always use a down-blowing CPU fan to be able to cool the VRMs. And if you see here, supports dual stacks MOSFETs, DSM, DigiPower 12+2 power phase design. Now these MOSFETs here, or whatever you want to call them, transfer the power that's put in, and let's open this one up, via these sockets into power for, amongst others, the CPU itself. These get hot, and when they get hot the specifications drift. In electronics, if something gets hot, the specifications, the minimal and maximal values sometimes change a bit. So it's important to keep these things cooled. That's why you also see a heat pipe here. Now in this case, let's go back over here. These connectors would be, of course, here. It's not all that obvious, perhaps on the photo, but that's the way the motherboard would be mounted. So it would be turned on its side in reference to this photo at least, and the CPU would sit here. And because the size of this case, there is in principle only limited room for cooling solutions at the top. So you can mount a fan without a problem, but still. This motherboard takes up almost the entire space you see here. It goes from like this to this to this to this. Now, top down blowing fan is important for MOSFETs. Or PW, well, whatever it's called, doesn't really matter for now, but air transfer from the case out helps. So 2 fans should be mounted over here. But let's take a quick gander at the CPU support list. Scroll down a bit. And where is it? So this one is the CPU we're talking about. And here you see 125 watts. Now, while talking to other manufacturers of motherboards, they stated that this is the default, as it should be, but this CPU, once again, here you can take a look, the FX-8350 can spike up to 140 in real life. So, it does require a bit of cooling. Now the next generation, quote unquote next generation, takes even 220 watts. And it's not PAL driver per se, it is Viscera, that's the core, it doesn't really matter. It's just a hot running CPU. So, nice motherboard, rated for this CPU, like this, so 8350, 125 watts. No asterisks somewhere, yet still is recommended with a top-down blower. So that's blowing towards the socket and therefore allowing the air to pass by the VRMs, voltage regulation modules, that was the word I was missing, and then cooling that as well. Good, right? Okay, now let's take a look at cooling solutions for the CPU fan itself. Now you can go with a custom setup of water cooling. You can also buy pre-packaged, pre-tested, pre-filled water cooling solutions, like for example this Sidon 120M. And in this case it is very apt because the 120 denotes the size of fan that can be mounted on the cooling radiator block, which of course expels the heat from the CPU, which should be mounted under this little device. Now let's click it open and let's take a proper look. What you see here are the mounting holes, and there's even a fan mounted on the other side, so you can mount them on 2 sides. But let's take a look at the specs. And what you see here is the CPU socket compatibility. And I'm looking at AM3 plus AM3 because this thing you see here is an AM3 plus socket. And I can almost say of the 2nd generation because the brackets that are here to retain a stock cooler or an air cooler do not have any connecting points to each other anymore like they used to have. And that's because of airflow towards the VRMs. If you've got a plastic bracket here, part of a bracket at least, it hinders airflow to those VRMs. So so the MOSFETs, and therefore degrade power delivery to the CPU among other things. But going back to water cooling, what you see here is that it does not specify any thermal rating. So it's questionable if this very nice liquid cooling solution will be adequate for this CPU of, once again, 125 watts. Now, in reality though, this cooling solution isn't an option for this case, because there is no room at the top of the case to mount a radiator plus a fan internally without interfering with this part of the motherboard. So there's a connector here, an 8-pin power connector that's connected to the power supply, which of course will be mounted here. But in reality, this piece of hardware is too, well, big for this case in this location. Now you could get away with mounting it here on the side panel, but you know, if you need to access your computer, you have to be careful because, well, these pipes might be too short, might damage, and etc, etc, etc. So this case is not ideal at all for water cooling in the case of a pre-made, pre-filled and pre-tested item like this inside an 120M. We can take a look. Here you see even a double mounted fan setup, so the cooling block and the radiator will be even bigger. You get my point, this won't fit at all. So, then you've got the question, what to mount when the CPU is socketed in this socket on this situation within this case. And then the height of the case, or the depth of the case, however you want to see it, becomes important. Now it doesn't state here on the website, but in the pamphlet that came with this case, it states that the height of a cooler can't be more than 122 millimeters, otherwise it will interfere with this panel. And this rate, if you put a fan here, that won't really interfere with the cooling solution here, unless you're going for something amazingly large. But you still need to have enough clearance for air to enter the cooler from the top, as well as being able to close this little side panel. Now, let's take a look at the Cooler Master. Oh, I'm sorry. The Arctic Cooling air coolers. It's once again water cooler, unless it's a custom designed system, won't really work in this case. You might get away with mounting the fan on the outside, but you know, and you've got to drill holes for, doesn't really work. If you want to keep it as is without doing really weird stuff, you have to go with air cooling. Now, not all websites of producers of air coolers or water coolers have such a nice little selection box, but that's why I chose this example. Arctic Cooling, or yeah, let's just call them Arctic, they do have it. So let's select the specifications we need, in principle at least, for the cooler. For cooling block plus ventilators, fans and etc. And we have an AM3 plus socket. Let's click that. Scroll down. And now we've got two choices. 150 watts plus or 90 to 150 watts. Let's go back here and take a second gander at this. 125 watts is what is specified apparently by AMD, or at least as interpreted by AsRock. I'm guessing from AMD, but you know, 140 watts was what was told to me. So, keeping in mind margins of error, we can select either 90 to 150 watts, and we see 3 coolers that should be able to cool this thing. But if you take a gander at the cooling capacity, which not all manufacturers of these cooling devices state, a top-down blowing one 100 watts, top-down blowing one 95 to 90 watts, and a side blowing one, because this is what will be attached to the CPU itself, won't work. While, well, let's take a gander here. Let's go back. But they are very powerful. So side blowing is very powerful, top down is less powerful. But this category won't work. So let's go up a scale. And I like a margin of error that's comfortable, you know. If these fans get dusty and the fins in the cooling block, and you can't see them really properly here, but if these fins get clogged with dust, it doesn't cool that well. So let's go up a bit. And the realization here is that there are no top-down blowing ones, because the CPU will always be, with this selection at least, at the bottom. So let's click one open and let's go for either the 300 watts cooling capacity or the 160 watts. Let's go with the 160 watts. It's even more expensive than the 300 watts, but hey, let's open that. So what you see here is cooling fans made most likely out of aluminium. A base plate, or whatever you want to call it, that is attached with thermal compound to the CPU itself. And you see these copper pipes. Now let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So in essence there are 4 or 8 what they call heat pipes that transfer the heat from the base plate to the cooling fins. And the black thing you see here is basically a fan mounted in between two sections of fins. Now the funny thing is, this heat pipe, and I don't know if it's right for all or applicable to all, well, they have most likely a fluid in them and a membrane on the side walls that stimulate a capillary reaction and wick cooled fluid back to where this system is very hot, of course at the side of the CPU. Now that's an interesting subject to read about, but basically these heat pipes enhance the cooling capacity of such a cooling block. But of course, like stated before, this is not a top-down blowing fan, this is a side blowing fan. And next to that, take a look at the height. We had 122 millimeters So let's check if this one would at least fit. And heat pipes are 6mm diagonally. There are 4 officially, but they go both ways, so you know, they transfer to both sides of the block at the same time. Diameter of the fan is 120mm, and the dimensions: length, width, height. 145mm height. So this is too tall, even if it was a top-down blowing one. Has all the retention brackets and such, you know. So that's interesting. And here you see the heat pipes in detail. Basically this part is attached to the CPU with the thermal compound that gets hot, then it transfers the heat via liquid inside of this, and capillary transaction, or yeah, let's call it that, works the cooler fluid back to the cooling block base plate. So 160 watts is adequate, but the thing is too tall. And I'm guessing with the Freezer 13 Pro or 13 Pro CO, the same thing will apply for enthusiasts. Well, that's nice. And let's go to the technical data straight away. Once again, those heat pipes, and these are even bigger, 8mm. So that's interesting. Diameter of the fan that's attached, 120mm, and there's a secondary fan of 15mm somewhere in this block. And is there a dimension? Yes, 159mm high. So once again, this one won't fit inside of the computer case. Now, let's also take something in next to basic compliance of specifications to the design you're trying to attain. Replaceability of these active components. Now, of course, the liquid that should be in these heat pipes is quote-unquote active, and I don't know if it degrades, but let's keep that out of the discussion. But this blower fan will degrade after a number of hours. This externally mounted fan will degrade after a number of hours. And in most likelihood, you'll basically go nutty from the sound they will start to make when stressed over a protracted period of time. And there should be an MTBF, mean time between failure, somewhere within these specifications. An interesting fact as well is the number of cubic feet per minute or cubic meters per hour. And you see this here. These two fans, as provided in the package, I suppose, provide about 100 cubic meters per hour or 50 cubic feet per minute of airflow through the cooling block. That gets you that 300 watts cooling capacity, more performance, max performance. Remember the dust. And the bigger heat pipes than quote-unquote normal helps out, but the active components will fail, and there's no specifications. There is a 6-year limited warranty, you know, nice. The gross weight is a kilo, 1005 grams, so that's not nothing. But I like it when the fans are replaceable. if they go because of a damage or usage, so normal degradation, I like to be able to replace them. And this 15mm fan is specially designed, I guess, for this cooling block. So to get a replacement part for this cooling block in its entirety, but what sub-assembly part, I'm guessing will be very difficult. So this is not really something I would aspire to integrate into any design, because a normal 120mm fan is of course replaceable, but this thing straddles around the cooling block itself, or at least the fins. That's not really replaceable. Another consideration therefore. Same goes here, here. This of course is one in the middle, same deal in principle. Now, there is no cooling block available from Arctic Cooling that is compatible with this motherboard if you require a top-down blowing fan to cool the VRMs. So Arctic, I'm sorry, you make some nice products as I see here, but you know, let me click this for fun and see what that is. Yeah, freezer range. So let's go to a different manufacturer, SilverStone. Now I don't know it personally all that well. I've seen the logo, but you know, they have a nice selectable area as well as Arctic. So let's select the socket of the motherboard, this thing, and that is AM3, and there's no plus, but let's do this and click on search, and then you see a number of compatible cooling solutions, and most likely they'll be compatible with a number of sockets, but let's click open this one, AM2, and here you see this is a nice little cooling block with a nice stock type fan that will be replaceable, but the TDP is only 65 watts, and that's the absolute max. So that's not compatible with this one, or even the defaulted rated TDP. So, might be nice to look at, might be easy to integrate into your system, but it doesn't conform to the specifications. So, they've got two cooling solutions with liquid cooling pre-filled, and let's take that one in as well. And here you see that the radiator, while designed very nice, oh, and look at that, it is because of where the hoses come into the cooling block or the radiator block, it is bigger than a default 120mm fan. So can that be mounted here? Nope, in reality most likely not, especially because you take this size, and here it states 4.5 centimeter or 45mm, of course, as it is written, but you also have to include the depth of the fan. So where is it? Here. That takes up a lot of space that isn't there in reality with this motherboard. So let's go a bit farther or further, and let's select the height. 122mm according to the case dimension specifications on the leaflet included with the case. So So let's click that and click search. And then you see the following. Two options. But they also state TDP. And let's click on 150 watts. Once again, the margin of error is interesting to include. And there's only one left. And because of the height, we selected 120 millimeters. It shows 82. We have this one, which is a top-down blowing cooler block. And look at this. SilverStone designed inspirations. Now, let's take a look at the specifications as best we can. The height, 82 millimeters. So, as is presented here with the fan mounted below the block, or the fan fins at least, this one conforms to the specifications. Now these sizes, so whatever you want to call them or deem them, have to be compatible with this as well. So where power is put in via an external cable from the power supply, these little pins here, not that little, but you get the point, as well as where the DDR slots are. So that's the big deal here, because as you can see, the cooling block, which will cover the CPU in its entirety most likely, I hope at least, well, the solution is very much overhanging. So will that fit on this? That's also a very important design question. Will it fit, at least in height, with one fan mounted below? Now, includes compact 120 millimeters PWM FEM for excellent cooling and low noise. Compact. Now, the specifications. CPU TDP. Fanless, so without fan, 65 watts. With 120 millimeters depth fan, 95 watts. With one 25 millimeters fan, 130 watts. And with both a 20 millimeter and a 25 millimeter fan, 150 watts. Now the weight of this cooler is 700 grams. Interesting to note as well. Life expectancy in hours, 30,000. Okay. Now the dimensions, once again with the fan mounted below the fins, pardon me, is 82 millimeters. Now, that's an interesting statement, because to reach, the 130 watts, can the fan be mounted, the bigger in-depth fan, below the cooling fins, or do they have to be mounted above? Question in regards to the memory sticks, RAM sticks, whatever you want to call it, if the cooling fins are overhanging towards this side. Now you can overhang them in principle, I think, towards every side. It won't work in this case. Once again, to that side, but you get the point. This is interesting. Fanless won't work with the CPU with one compact, I'll say it like that. It won't work because it's 95 watts TDP. With one bigger, that's I guess not included in this kit or in this package or in this product, you know, it will be 130 watts. So that will comply, at least in principle, to the 125 watts TDP of the CPU, as stated by AsRock, as interpreted from AMD. But of course, we want margin of error. So we'll have to go with the 150 version. So included, I guess, is the 20 millimeters depth, 120 millimeters fan. Yeah, but we'll want to mount the system like this. So here will be the CPU. This will be on top of the CPU with thermal paste in between. The heat pipes will transfer the heat into the vent area, and with two fans of 120 millimeters in this direction and in this direction, and 25 this direction and 20 this direction, will attain 150 watts TDP, CPU TDP, according to the specifications of course, SilverStone. Now, small form factor is what SSF means. And this is interesting. Let's take in the heat pipes a bit. Let me check one thing. 6 millimeters diameter heat pipe. So not the 8 of the Cooler Master one or the Arctic one we looked earlier at. So the Freezer 13 Pro or 13 Pro CO. 300 watts. It is impressive, I have to admit that. But that won't fit. So what you see here is 6 heat pipes transferring the heat into the cooling vent area, which air will flow through from here, from the top downwards, and then spread over the motherboard towards the VRMs and these areas to try to keep them cool. So take in the number of heat pipes, and I've seen a correlation while looking at these types of coolers. It almost seems that the more heat pipes in such a system, the better the cooling capacity should be. Now of course different diameter heat pipes will perform differently, but a 6 is interesting. This one had in principle 4 because they are somehow connected to each other, but you see basically 8 heat pipes coming from the CPU blocked, well, base plate, let's call it the base plate. And here you see 6, most likely 3. And let's go to less cooling capacity, and we're only using Arctic as an example. So here you see what seems to be 2 or 3. So that's 6. Seems to be, yeah, 6. Well, in most likelihood it is 3 because they run through. But let's deselect this. And there isn't really an option. But you get my point. The more heat pipes, it seems that the better the heat transfers will be from the base plate to the cooling fins themselves. So, with the dimensions of the case in this direction, 122 millimeters, with 82 here, plus 25 in this setup, there will be enough clearance on top to be able to run this cooling setup in the case. I'll calculate the difference very quickly. So that's 122 millimeters minus, and let's close this one, 82, and let's check that. Is that very true? Where are the dimensions? Where are the dimensions? Well, hello. It doesn't state that. Okay, here. So that's here. Yeah, there we go. Minus 82 minus 25. So this is the case tolerance. This is the cooler itself, and added on top will be a 25 millimeter depth, 120 millimeter fan. Right? I think so, at least. So 15 millimeters case clearance in principle in regards to not hitting this side panel. Now there's one important thing when looking at cooling options for your computer, and that's the reality of being able to purchase them. I know I can purchase this one in my local area. I can even order one from my local shop and they'll get it in for me. Many cooling solutions, however, are not that widespread or easily available. Like if I go to the shop because my integrated fan is busted, and especially designed fan is busted, and I can't get a replacement, sometimes you're just out of luck and you have to buy an entirely new cooling block. Once again, only using Arctic cooling as an example picture, but it's the same here. Cooling. Let's go here. Air coolers. And this website isn't all that handy, but here you see some very funky designs. V8 GTS with plastic casings, I guess, at least. Not sure, doesn't really matter. But the fans that are in here are not the general case type fans. Like here, even this is a default or a standard case fan. It has a funky shape. Is there something normal? Like this is the normal case fan type, 120 millimeters, and then a square, basil, or whatever you want to call it. Those will fit on here. So if one of my fans is damaged or underperforming, I can replace it because they are clipped onto the fins with clips. Sometimes they screw in, sometimes they click in, but the basic premise is replaceability and therefore repeatability. If these heat pipes don't bust, if the thing still performs and your fans are busted, you can replace them cheaply enough without having to replace the entire cooling block, which is a hassle, especially with the heavier cooling blocks. This is with one fan, I guess, the 20 millimeters depth version. But if you take a look at this, you get this hardware with this cooler to be able to mount it to this motherboard by most likely replacing these two retention brackets with all that hardware. So repeatability for ease of maintenance is, in my estimation, also very interesting to look at. Now, TDP is most important in my estimation. If it can fit in your case, which this one seems to be able to, even with its overhang above parts of the components, not this way, but at least the 3 other ways, I would guess at least. It's a top-down design, so it's compatible with cooling the VRMs, voltage regulation modules, that are located here, with the chips that are under here. Look at this. This one even has a heat pipe to connect these 2 cooling blocks. So you get my point. Hopefully at least. Taking your specifications when you order stuff. Sometimes that's not possible, like with this case. I knew what I was getting into in regards to the power supply and the number of areas where I could place additional fans, and this case came with 120mm fan here, but none here, here, here or here, and of course without a power supply because, well, my version of the package had no power supply included. But you need to take a look at these things because sometimes it doesn't fit. Some cases are not compatible with full-size ATX motherboards like this one. And you come to the conclusion that you need to know these things. Now these are not all that interesting for now at least. But here you go. The motherboard supports a CPU up to 220 watts. That's interesting. And let's take a look. These are all things you might be interested in when buying components, or at least a motherboard in this case. And well, let's see, does it state it somewhere? I hope it does. AM3 Plus socket, socketed processors of course, 8-core CPU, which is of course the AMD FX-8350, and it doesn't really state it, but it's an ATX motherboard, full size. So let's go back to the overview, and then you can see in principle that if you go with the higher or the newer generation of FX processors, the octa-core, so that's 8 cores on one CPU, you have to use water cooling to keep it cool enough, because there are in essence no real air-cooled solutions for these CPUs. The 8350 is like the limit in our air cooling, and because of the case you have to be very careful in which cooler you invest your money and time. If you've pre-mounted it with the stock cooler, you might be forced with the case you have to unbolt the motherboard, mount the mounting bracket on the back of the motherboard, depends on which, and I'm not sure, still have to look at that to be sure before I order this, if I order this. But you have to be very wary with these things, because this is not a cheap item. This cooling block is 60 to 70, sometimes even 80 euros. That's without both fans. So if you buy it, use it, abuse it, damage it, good luck getting your money back, because you didn't check the specifications. And that's the one thing with the AMD FX-8350 stock fan system with its included cooling block in boxed set. It should work, it just however doesn't in reality. It's a shame they ship it. They tried to save, in my estimation, my personal understanding from every type of specification I looked at, they're trying to save a couple of pennies while risking the longevity of this CPU, because if it's too hot, the life expectancy in most electronic components will decrease. And if you look at the specifications once again in these videos, which you can click now, you'll see also a thermal rating for the fan itself. So don't be fooled. Check your specifications, make sure what you buy works. Get expert advice and etc. So, still on the fence in regards to this one, but it seems to be one of the only solutions I can really buy within reality of my location. It looks nice though, I won't deny that. But, you know, I'll have to take a further gander and make sure. Because I don't want to waste either money or, more importantly, a lot of time in mounting this part way and having to reverse the process. It's bad for your motherboard, it's bad for your CPU, or at least risky, and such and such and such and such and such. However, AMD, once again, still mad at you that you don't provide a proper stock cooler with fan in the boxed version of the AMD FX-8350. But this video is rambling on. I think it's important to note these types of things. It makes you a better consumer in my estimation at least. And for fun and giggles, go back to the other videos and count the number of heat pipes, because these are 6 distinctive heat pipes. And count the number of heat pipes that are really on this cooling block. So, thanks for watching, thanks for your attention and your patience. Hope you learned something. See you in the next video. Oh yeah, thumbs up, thumbs down at your discretion. Share the video, subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.